Alright, so I'm going to start off just with like Sketchup Basics. Um, if you start off grabbing your line tool, the basic sort of tool you use in SketchUp is lines. So everything that SketchUp is going to draw is based off of lines, like edges, lines, and surfaces. So once you connect 3 lines in the same plane, SketchUp will create a solid surface which has one white side and one blue side by default. So if you select that and you reverse face, you can see this is a white side. Just quick navigation tricks. If you use your mouse scroll wheel, in is to zoom in, back will zoom out. You can use the wheel. If you click it in, that becomes orbit, and then if you hold shift while you're orbiting, it becomes the pan tool. You can also get these up here using some of these tools. Let me turn off some of these so it's a little simpler. Turn podium off. Okay. If you go to, I guess it's camera. So here are some of the tools that are a little bit extra. But that's your orbit. You have pan. So looking back at this, a lot of the times the way you'll model things in SketchUp, you make it 2-dimensionally, and then you use the push and pull tool, and you push it out, and then you get something that's 3D. The big thing with SketchUp is how you select things. So a single click will pick whatever object you're actually directly selecting. So it could be one line, one face. If you double click, you get that face with all the edges that touch it. And then if you triple click, so 3 clicks really fast, then you grab that whole face, all the edges, and then anything else that touches it. So you'll see you grab the entire thing. So does that help? Yep. Yeah, so that really helps, especially when you're trying to make things into groups. So let me cover that again. So if you use the move tool, once you have something selected, you can move it and put it over there. If you didn't have it selected and you just try moving using the move tool, you'll end up doing this and kind of making your thing all weird, which looks okay, but then when you orbit around, you realize you're just kind of destroying this thing. You try and move that edge, it does stuff like this. So to avoid doing this, let's just delete that and start with a new one. So I'm going to do a rectangle this time, and then push this up. So if you triple click something, you can always move it like that, and then while you're moving, if you look down here at the bottom, it tells you control equals toggle the copy. So when I'm moving something, I hit control, now I've created a copy of it, and then you click and it'll create that copy. If there's a specific distance you want to move it, while you're moving it, you can look down here and it tells you how far you're moving it. So this down here at the bottom, whenever you're in a command, always look down there because it gives you some good tips. And that's usually how you control. SketchUp isn't very like pushy and in your face. Like all the controls are kind of like down at the bottom. If you ignore them, they don't bother you, but they're there and they can control stuff kind of a lot more precise than just moving things by hand. So right now, let's say I wanted to go 20 feet. So as I move it back and forth, you can see this number changes. When you're moving in the direction that you want, once it starts going that way, you can type in 20 feet, use a little feet sign, and then you hit enter, and it will like snap it to that distance. If you wanted to make a copy 20 feet over, you move it, you hit control so that it becomes that. If you notice on the mouse, you get the little plus sign too. That's how you know it's always going to be making a copy. And then now I can type in the 20 feet again and hit enter, so it moved it over here. One thing that you need to understand really well with SketchUp is that it has what I call sticky geometry. So as soon as you touch 2 objects together like this, they're going to stick. And so one thing that's cool about SketchUp is you can always grab a line and divide a surface, and now when I go to push, it's gonna push that face, and then you can move this over, and then if I draw a line across here, it's easy to subdivide it. And this is the trick I was showing you, John. When you're pushing something, if you want it to go exactly to a specific distance, you can move the mouse off of that face. I'm just clicking one time and then I let go, and then you can move the mouse onto another face and it will snap to try and align with that face. But as soon as, let me triple click this and move this up here, if I touch that to there, now that became part of that geometry. Just like I drew that line and then pushed it, it became a different face. Now if I try and move this away, see, it's gonna warp everything all weird, and it's not gonna like me moving this thing around. So that's not what we want to have happen. So I'm gonna undo, and then to avoid that, you can group this so that SketchUp knows that should be one thing on its own, this should be one thing, and that can be one thing. So to do that, you just select the entire object. So that could be either through picking this face, holding shift, picking that face, doing it like that, or you can drag a window this way. So notice from left to right, it's only going to grab anything that was completely within that window. See, it's not grabbing these faces, but if I go this way, the same exact window, it will grab all of these faces because it touched them.
But you can also click on.
You could, yep. So I'm showing you all the different ways. So you could do this, you could go this way, but notice here I'm grabbing that lady, which I don't want. So the fastest way is click 1, 2, 3, and then once you make sure you got it, you then right click, tell it make group, and then now it's made that a group. Now I can move this, and you only need to select it one time. See, it's a single click. So if I wanted to move, I can now select this guy one time, move it, and I can put this up here, and now I can move it off too. It's not going to stick.
That.
Yours doesn't do that?
No, is that in the settings?
For what?
The third click.
You have to do it fast, like 1, 2, 3, like really quick. Did it do it?
Well, first of all, my computer is super slow for some reason.
Does it let you move around? It could be loading.
It lets me move around, but it's when. Okay, now I get it.
Sometimes it's how fast you click, because if you go like 1, 2, and then 3, like sometimes it thinks you're trying to do 2 different things.
So I have a question.
Yep.
You said to copy it, you press Control.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the same on Mac.
Try on the Mac. If not, it might be Command.
See,
What does it say at the bottom?
It was doing that when I clicked 3 times, but I get that's when I did it slower. So I don't know.
Oh, it went into the group? Was it already grouped?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if it's already grouped, you just need to click one time. It's going to select the whole group.
Yeah, his doesn't show it doesn't show the little plus sign.
On the Mac, I think it's a different button. Let me see. It's either Option, I think. So down here it should tell you Option is copied. So,
there.
so see, then you get that,
Okay.
and then I'll let you do it. So you can always click one time. So on the Mac, it's Option instead of Control, and it will tell you down here. So if you're ever wondering, when you go to hit Move, look down here at the bottom and see what it says. So that tells you what it's trying to say. So this last thing, Shift equals lock inference. If I move this, notice how I can move in any direction. And when I get aligned with one of these 3 axes, so the red direction is that way, green is this way, and it lights up green. If you hold Shift once it goes the way you like, see how it gets thicker? So I'm holding Shift even though it's not showing up on my keylogger. Now I can move the mouse anywhere, and it's going to only move this in that direction. Same is true if I go that way and then hold Shift. And if I wanted to go vertically, I need to move the mouse up, and it turns blue, and then you hold Shift, and then you can get it to snap to that. So that's another way you can move things and snap them to other. Shift will lock the axis you're moving. You can also do it without moving the mouse in the direction if you use your arrow keys. So if I'm trying to move something,
instead of searching around trying to find
right, that axis, because sometimes it's like kind of tricky, or it keeps jumping to something, or it's like you've rotated the entire model like 1 degree. So like it'll never go the way you want, and it keeps trying to go with the red direction instead of just off by one.
That's what
You-
I was doing for like 10 minutes.
Yep. And so one cool trick is, let's say you want to go to the red direction, which is that way. You can hit the right arrow and see it becomes red. And so now it'll only move in the red direction. And now you just find something that's in that direction and you click. If you want to go in the green direction, it's the left arrow.
And that works on the move command. That's what I should.
On move, yep. So you can hit the move, and let's say I hit left. Now I'll hit up, and it becomes up direction.
Okay.
And so the
you want
way, yeah, the way I remember it is up is the up arrow, which is really easy, and then the red direction is the right arrow. And both of those start with the letter R, so right and red. And then the only one you have left is green, so that's the left. Yeah, it is pretty easy.
Because I was trying the move command without
I don't think
that,
down does
and
anything.
Every time I shift over to a face, it would automatically
It
shift
jumps
axis.
over, yep.
It's
Mhm.
so much nicer.
So those are like little tips, but they make a big difference once you start modeling, especially if you add up how many times you need to move a face or move an object. It's like thousands of times. So it's learning those little tricks, and then like the shortcuts. So if you look at any of these commands, so like see here, I just went up to the top under camera, and there's like these big letters. So learn these, because these are your shortcuts. So like pan is the hand, it's on H. So I could grab the hand and do this, or I could just hit the H key and it gives you that. Like orbiting is O, if you remembered, or moving is M. So I get the
Yes.
move command.
Didn't you show us the orbit, like you get lost in the model sometimes?
Yeah.
'Cause that happened to me. I
Mhm.
mean, suddenly it was all white, and I didn't know.
Yep.
'Cause I was inside.
Yeah, if you're inside, the best shortcut to know is how to do zoom extents. So you can go to camera zoom extents, and it says it's Control Shift E, but I found that Shift Z will do the same thing.
Yes,
So
I think
Shift
that's what
and
you
Z,
showed us.
Shift and Z. So let's say I accidentally scrolled inside this thing. Now I'm stuck. I can't move around. You can use the eyeball and look around, so I'm inside there. And like to try and scroll your wheel out of here, as you get closer to a face, it slows down because it doesn't want you to go through it. And so it takes forever to scroll. It's like a rubber band, like you're trying to pull through, and the rubber band's holding you more and more and more. And then if you hold Shift Z, it just jumps you out, and it just zooms your whole extent, so that anything that you had modeled. So let's say I don't have this guy. If I hit Shift Z, see, it'll zoom in here. But if I move this guy and make a copy of this like 5,000 feet away, and now I hit Shift Z, see, it's like tiny now because it needs to include that guy that's way far out. So
And you kill the person with a dot out in space.
yeah. Yep. So the way we can get this now, so these are groups, which are really cool because a group lets you can make a copy. You can move these around. So let's say this is something I wanted to model. So let's say this is a piece like that. I can make a copy and move it up. Let's say 15 feet. Let's say I wanted to make like a vertical one of these. I could make a new face. Like there's tons of ways you can model, and this will be up to you guys, like how you prefer to work. I could make a rectangle here, let's say something like that, and then push this up, and then make this a group. You could do it that way. You could also, same thing, you can grab this and use your rotate command, which is, I hit the Q key, which is that, there it is, the icon. And this lets you rotate an object, but notice at the bottom it's saying pick rotation plane and origin, and then it also says this again, see? Control equals toggle copy, and shift is to lock your inferences. So that's the same as the move command. So if I hit M, move, see, it's the same, control copy, alt will toggle auto fold, but don't worry about that. Shift, so now we just go back to the rotate command. We have these two, so if I'm rotating this guy, let's say, so you can do this two ways. There's actually three ways I could think of immediately. You can move the plane onto something that's in that direction. Notice how it becomes the color of the axis based on what face you're on. The other way is wherever I click, there's two things to pay attention to. Is wherever I click, that becomes the center of rotation, and then the color of that little like protractor or whatever that is, that's the plane that you're going to be rotating in. So if I click here, and now it's going to ask me where do you want to start calculating the angle. You can click anywhere really, it doesn't matter. Then see, it's going to rotate around this point that I picked. If I wanted this to be a little bit more useful, if I'm trying to make a vertical wall here, I would probably pick the middle point. And look, see, it's trying to give me the blue direction. If you click, and rather than letting go, you hold down. So I'm going to click and hold down. Now I can move that. It keeps the center there, but now I can move in whichever direction I want. Does that make sense? And so if I wanted to go in the red direction, I could do this, and now I can start to rotate it. And when I'm here, before I click the next time, you hit Control, and it will make a copy. And then I can type in 90, and so it does it that way. The other way you can tell it to lock the axis is you can hit the arrows just like we said before. So right is red. See, so now no matter where I go, it'll give me red direction. See, even on these faces, because I hit the right arrow. And then you can also do this. Let's say we had like a weird angle that wasn't necessarily like 90. So it's not on the green or red axis or blue. It's this weird angle. You can do this. Let's say I wanted to rotate that piece right there at that angle. All you need to do is move the mouse onto the weird angled direction. So this face, it's at that weird angle. And once you're there, hold Shift. And if you do that, you'll notice that it stays at that angle, and you can move that anywhere and it will lock that angle. So that's a cool way to, I mean, you'll rarely use that, but if you need to, it's useful to have that like that. I can delete this guy now. Let me make a copy of this using this piece from the corner here. I'm going to click and drag in the red direction, and now I'm going to move this up, hit Control, type 90. And then here I can push this up to there. So now I've made this shape. One cool thing, you can, let's say I want to center this in between those two. When you use the move, notice like how it lights up like a purple pink color. When you get to an endpoint, it'll say endpoint and group, and then once you find the midpoint, see it became a circle and it says midpoint and group. You can click there, and then now you move the mouse around, and then you can find the midpoint here. It's going to snap, and you can click there. So now you know it's centered on center. So we have that.
Is it already set up for now?
It should be. Yep, you shouldn't need to turn it on. You need to find it. And it really matters where you click to start moving something, because that's where it's going to snap to. So it wouldn't really make sense to try and move that piece if I click out here in space. Because watch this, let's say I wanted to move that guy to the top, just like I did, center point to center point. If I click here and try and move it up here, look where it goes, it flies away. Because where I clicked, it's going to take whatever that relationship was to the object, it will keep that relationship when you move it. So it's always like, let's say it was 10 feet to the left, when you click the next spot, it's going to put that object 10 feet to the left of wherever you clicked. So always be really specific as to where you want to pick, and be careful to pick something. So if I knew I wanted to align that corner there, I would say, okay, I can click there, I have a snap. Which piece on this guy would I want to align there? So I would say this corner. So then you can zoom in here, you can come around however you want to do it. I'm going to grab that corner, and then I know I can snap this piece there. And then you hit Control to copy, and you put it there. So these right now are all groups. There's also what are called components in SketchUp, which are kind of like a hybrid of a group. They work a lot like a group, but they have a little bit more advanced properties. So let's say I take all of these, and here's a neat thing. Just because something's grouped doesn't mean it can't be grouped again. So we can have multiple things like this, and if I pick them, so look, when I hold Shift using just the selection tool, you get the plus minus see next to it, it becomes a plus minus and it gets larger. If I click the next object like that, it's going to add to the selection, but also if you click an object that's already selected, it takes it out. And so that's cool if you're trying to do that, but if, let's say I have this situation where I have some of them selected, some of them not, and I want to grab all of them using like a window, it's going to do this never-ending loop where it will pick the opposite one. So see, it keeps switching because it's unselecting the ones that are selected and selecting the ones that aren't. Instead of shift, if you hold control, it becomes just a plus sign. So the plus doesn't matter where you click, it'll always add. And then if you hold control and shift, it becomes minus. So now I can just unselect everybody. So the fastest way to grab a bunch of people or a bunch of objects is to hold control actually and just drag the selection from right to left, so you get this little window and then it grabs all of them. Once you have all of them, I'm going to just make this a group. So notice how now that group window doesn't stick tight to the object because it's not a square exactly. So it'll show you the extents of the object that you have in there. If I were to take this and push this way out, now look at like the group. See, you can tell these are all grouped because it makes that little like section box around it. It's telling you what's in there. So if I want to copy this, you can. I can make a copy here. Let's say I want to move this 40 feet away. And let's say I want 3 copies of those. As soon as you move an object, so let me go back. I'm going to show you how to, it's called creating an array. So I'm going to move this guy out of the way. The first thing you do is you set the first distance. So this is the distance you want all of these to be equally spaced. So I'm going to hit move, control to make a copy, and then type in 40 feet and hit enter. And then the next thing you have to type, you can't hit any other command. You have to type in the number and then the letter X. Or you can do the letter X and then the number of copies you want. So if I wanted 3, you could do 3X and then you hit enter and it makes 3 copies instead of just 1. And it's still live. As long as you don't activate a different command, you can keep changing that. So if you put a number and then the letter X anywhere either in front or behind, it will change how many objects it's creating. And if you only put a number, that's going to change the distance in between the arrays. So you'll keep the same number but change the distance. So let's try it. Let's say I want 5 now instead of 3. You type 5x, enter. If I only wanted 2, you do 2x, enter. Seeing it keeps getting rid of them. And then if I change the number without an x, it will change the spacing. So last time we did 40. Let's try 50 feet, enter. See, it spaced those same ones out. You could try 25 feet. It'll bring them in really tight. Let's try 60 feet. And just to test it, you can add more of them now at the 60 feet increments. So if I type 5 times, it adds them there. So I can come down again if I wanted 30 feet. So it's pretty neat the way that works, where it lets you keep doing it. On the flip side, let's say you don't know how many copies you want, but you want the space to be equally divided. So let's say like we knew it wants to go that far or something like this. Then what we can do is, instead of moving this object the first distance and then doing it 20 times, we can move it to the final distance. Let's say like 150 feet, enter. And now instead of doing times using the X key, you do the backslash, so this one, and then you divide that by 3 and hit enter. So it will divide that space by however many you put. So if I do it again, divided by 5, we get 5 in between, or divided by 2, we'll put 1 in the center. I'm pretty sure you can also change the final distance by just typing it without either a divided sign or a times sign. So that lets you kind of really array a lot of things. So now let's see the difference between this and a component. So a component, if I move this over, let's say 80 feet, just kind of get in the habit of always typing a distance. Like especially if you're working in an architecture firm, like that's immediately like a red flag when you see people just moving stuff random distances, and then you get like all these weird numbers like 105 3 millionths of an inch. And so always just kind of move it, kind of get an eye for where it is, and then type a nice number so that you can always move stuff back. To convert this to a component, you could either do this when you first make the group. You could skip the step of making it a group. You can go to a component, or you can do it after it's already been made a component. You can create it into a group. Backwards. If it's already a group, you can still make it a component, see? So if I do that, it'll ask you to name it. This is because SketchUp is going to save this. Think of this as like a block in CAD or something like that, where it's going to save this file outside. Some softwares like Max call these proxies. It will save it on the computer somewhere, and then basically it's referencing it into the model. So you can call this component 1. If it was a column, you call it column, or if it's like a mullion that you're using that's going to repeat a lot, you call like mullion type 1 or something like that. And then there's all these options you can change. For right now, I'm going to leave them all basic, so it's just called component 1. And then I'm going to copy this just like we did that guy. I'm going to move from there to here and say 2 times. So we have the same situation going on here that we do here, right? And just so that we're clear, I'm going to do this so that we don't forget. I'm going to call one group. Let me just make that larger from the beginning. Group. Say 10 feet. And then this one is going to be component. So right now they look exactly the same. They'll work. Whoa, that's cool. So I'm going to put that there. So these guys. So you can see, you use those same tools. You can snap them wherever you want to go. So I'm going to go that way. So here's my group. If I go into this group, notice how it's going to gray out everything else because it's a group. So once you're in it, you're only editing what's within the group. If I make a copy of this and move it over, let's say I want to move to here and then divide that by 3. So I can have this be a group, and then that's a group, and that's a group. And then if I wanted to, you make a copy of that, it's still a group. These can all be independent of each other. Even though they were based off of this original one, notice how they still are unique. These now are all based off the same component. Notice here in the definition, they're all called component number 1. So these ones are just called group. They don't have any sort of specialty. See, it's saying there's 2 of these in the model. This one, there's only 1 like that. So if I go into this, as soon as I pick this, notice how it's selecting and highlighting objects that are not in this one, but are in other components related to this. So here, whenever I pick this, it's only affecting what's within there. So if you go to here, this is kind of a cool one. If you go to View, Component, Edit, and you say Hide Rest of Model, I added this shortcut because I use this command all the time, but there isn't one by default. Hide Rest of Model. Notice how it only shows you what's within this group. So when you go within in a group with that setting on, it's going to hide everything besides the group. Where this is really useful is, let's say I wanted to pull this down from the top, but how would you get there? Because it's like embedded up against that face. So as soon as you go into it, now that face is gone, and you can push this down. And then you can do, since I have it on a shortcut, I can toggle it back on, or you can go here, and then you could snap to something else. But notice how when I go in there, with this, the same thing, all 3 of them stay active. Instead of here, only one of them does. That's because these are all related. So whenever I select anything here and I move this, let's say I do that same command, divide that by 3. Now all of them will become the same. And this is true anywhere I move this. So just like we did that array where we copied it 40 feet or whatever it was, did 3 times, you can use the same command on the rotate. So let's say I move this guy from here, and then I wanted to rotate that, I don't know, 15 degrees. You can tell it to do that times 6, and we get this nice array. If I were to change any of these, it doesn't matter that they're in different directions. It's going to just look at what that initial component was, and I can change the first one or the last one, and it won't make a difference because it's going to treat these all exactly the same. So if you have something that needed to be, so let's just push this down. I can undo this so that you guys can see it. So notice all of them changed now, even the ones that are in different directions. It didn't matter. If I wanted to paint these different colors using like the materials here, you can either open up in the tray on materials, or you can use the bucket up here at the top. The shortcut is the letter B, so if you ever hit B, it'll become the bucket. And you can pick like a color and you can paint something. So see, only this one changed even though it's a component. That's because I'm painting from the outside of the component. So does that make sense? I haven't activated that component, I'm just painting from like out here. As soon as you go inside the component and you paint something, all of them will become colored that way, because it's basically like you're changing it within the component. If I were to go back now and change these to a different color, watch this. If I grab like a yellow and color this guy, only the faces that were not already colored change. So here, wherever it has that default white material, it will change. But since there was something that was applied to it within the component, that has priority because it knows like it should be this color. So only the default will get overridden from outside, or any other color that you apply from the outside of the group. So now I could go in here and make them pink, and the only thing that will change is everything that wasn't already colored from the inside. So here's another thing that's cool. If I go within it and color this that color, see, it overrides whatever was on the outside of the group. So that's something to remember. Sometimes I get people asking me all the time, they're like, hey, I'm painting something, why is it not changing? Or why do I always have to go within the group to change just one face every time? And it's because something like that happened. So just like here, that whole face is that, I could go in again into the component and then also into this and change that face to like green. And now if I try and paint this from the outside, let's say make it like this bluish teal color, see, only that changes. If I go within, all of them changed that had that color. And see here, where there's a different color applied to it, different stuff is happening. And then if you apply it just within the group to everybody, they all get it. But that face that I went in within that group, it didn't change because it's kind of like hierarchy. You have to keep going down into the groups until you get to that actual face if you paint it. So that's something to keep in mind, where you could technically be making a lot of work for yourself if you keep opening the groups and painting them on the inside, whereas you can use this strategy to decide what gets put into one group versus what gets split into another group. So let's say you had something that needed to be wood and something else that needed to be concrete, or basswood versus chipboard if you're modeling like something that you're using in your model. You could separate the groups based off of the plane that they're in, like the direction that that object is going, or also the material. So sometimes you make a group within a group, kind of like cut out of it, so that you can do the materials, two different things, a lot easier. So these are all pretty simple shapes, but it really helps. The next thing that we could talk about that's really useful is kind of controlling You can use shadows and let's look at the styles. So the styles is something that I get asked a lot about. So I'm going to close this. You can go under here. Let's turn on the shadows just so you have something. So there's this tray. You can also see here under view shadows, or you can go here shadows and then you click this box that turns on your shadows. So I'm going to orbit around so you can see all these guys are floating in the air. They're not even on the ground. So I'm going to pick everyone and move them all to the ground so you see the shadow actually on the ground. See if origin, there you go. So with the shadow settings, it lets you change a couple things. One is how the time of day changes, so you can move these back and forth. So eventually you get to like nighttime and your whole thing will turn black. You can also change the time of the year. So obviously the closer you are to summer, the more vertical your shadows are throughout the range. Notice how like they're pretty much under the building here. If you go to like the winter months, you get much longer shadows. So if you change these settings, these don't actually affect the shadows as much as they do how the faces look where the sun is hitting them. So light is where the sun is hitting. So watch this face. If you move it to the right, it'll get like brighter or darker. See? So that affects those faces. And then dark is how the face changes when it's in the shadow. So you can go like darker or lighter. So wherever your shadows are, that's basically like the intensity of the shadow. Use sun for shading. If you click that and you have like a material that can be affected by like this, you'll notice that it gets kind of like a little bit different. And then here, if you uncheck this, like see, you won't see any shadows on another face, which I guess some people want not to see. And then on ground would be here. The times that I don't use on ground are, let's say like I have something that's recessed below ground like a pool. If you have on ground selected, so let me show you the perfect example. So I'm going to draw here, let me flip that. I'm going to draw this, say this is my pool. If I push this down, and then you say on ground, notice how it looks okay there. But as soon as I have something here, let's say there's like a little building here or something. Notice how we get that weird shadow there, like floating at the top. So if there was actually a face there, it would be okay, right? If there's like water there or something, or but let's say this is like a lower like atrium or like a auditorium or something like that, you really wouldn't have that shadow there in real life. So it's kind of weird to have that one in there because it also casts the shadow down like the way it should be, like the true shadow on the face. If you uncheck this, it just gets rid of that. And then anywhere you actually have, so if I actually did have a shadow over there, it will put it. I'm just pushing this line way out so you can see if you've actually modeled something, it's going to put a shadow there. So if I make that a group, so now I have that. So that's just one of those things where depending on what it is you're doing, you may need to change that setting, or if you don't need to change it, don't worry about it. And then from edges, this is like if you drew something like, let's say I had a face and then I pushed it up and then I decided to like delete all the lines out. If you don't check this, that will never cast a shadow because it's too thin. But once you put from edges, it does have a little shadow. I really don't know a whole lot of people that model stuff like that, like wire, like lines like that, but I guess like you could. So by default that one's off. So that's pretty much the shadows. If your model is really complicated, it could slow your computer down a lot, having the shadows on. Also, depending on which style you're using and how fast your computer is, that'll affect a lot of the things too. So now that we understand the shadows, let's go to your styles, because this changes the way your model will look. So you can use this to your advantage, or if you don't understand them, like your disadvantage, I guess. So if I change here the first drop down where it says styles and go down to just default styles, pretty much here is like all you really need to worry about at the beginning. Depending what it is that you're using the SketchUp model for and how you're either presenting it or if you're exporting it to put it into Photoshop and do some sort of like editing, the style can make you have a lot less work to do in post-production or a lot more work depending on which ones you're using. So let's say I wanted to use this one, which is 3D printing style. It looks like that. If I go to architectural design, it looks a little different. And then like as you keep going through, you can see certain ones have different things active. The default style. Hidden line is super useful when we get into Photoshop, and you guys will realize that you can change the blend mode in Photoshop and then get rid of white or get rid of black and certain colors like that really easily. So if you can make your whole model look white except what you actually modeled, then that saves you a ton of time, like going manually and cutting stuff out as a model. So we can look at that later today. Landscape architect style, shaded. You can also do this. If you click this, there's you can pull up more, like you could add new ones or make one. You can also edit them. So if I go here and I zoom in, notice how the lines around the edges, these are called profiles, and this style are a little bit thicker. So see here, this line is the outside of that face, whereas this line that's here in the middle is in the center of this object. These lines will get thicker, have a thicker line weight than those in this style. So if we go to edit, which is the next tab over, we can see that here the profiles are set to 2. So this is pixels. So 2 pixels. So if we turn that off, notice that line got thinner. And then if you want to go like more style, you can make that 4. So you can really see that. That's only like really like useful like while you're modeling, I guess. Watch like the edge of this face. As soon as I orbit so that that edge is like the profile of this shape, it gets thicker. See there, now it's thicker, and then that same line becomes a lot thinner as soon as you turn enough where something else is the profile. Typically, you can leave this at 2, or if you want it to look super clean, you can leave it at 1, and then everything looks the same. You can also turn on back edges if you want to see like ghosted things. At some point, like if you want, you can turn all these on and then get like a crazy looking model, which can look sketchy or cool, and the more stuff you add, like the weirder it can get and slow you down. So some of these are good. If you use the style builder, it lets you kind of like add more effects and stuff, but you can also do it here. So this first box is all about edges. Notice how it's just like a box and wireframe kind of view. If I turn off that, I just want to look like this. And then the next box over is the face settings. So just like it looks, what you're seeing is what you're controlling here. So this is the default material for SketchUp. So when you first make a face, that's the front color, that's the back color. So that's kind of how it's setting those up. Down here is if you want actually have transparency. So if you do, then that's good. The next one over is your background settings. So notice how the ground here is actually just one solid color. There's actually not a ground technically in this one. If I turn it on, you'll see that there is a ground here, and you'll notice you can go underground. So it's like the hidden SketchUp world of the underground. And then all you see is the background color. So if you have this on, you can turn it on and off. Same thing is true with the sky. So if I look up, I can turn the sky on and off, and then everything becomes the background color. And then your background color, if you want to change it, you just click here, And I typically like this one, hue, saturation, and brightness, and then you can make these all white. So if you wanted to, you can go into each of these settings and make it custom exactly the way you want it. Watermark is if you wanted to add like your logo. Let's say like you want to like add your signature or something cool, or you wanted your company logo on everything you do. You could do that. And then what's this last one? Modeling settings. So this one's cool. You can change the settings on, so here it's telling you selected objects turn blue, which is true, right? If I wanted my selected objects to be like some weird color, you could do that, see? And the only thing that changes is what's selected. We have a guy at my office that loves like orange, and we know whenever he used the model, because whenever you pick stuff it lights up orange. So a locked object, if you right click and tell it lock, see it turns red, and now I can't do anything with that. If you try and move it, it'll be like nope. See, it's saying there's nothing selected that can be moved. So that's good if you bring in like a site plan or something from CAD, or like an aerial from Google Maps. You can drop that in and lock it, and it'll never move on accident. Because sometimes you don't realize you grabbed the whole site plan and you moved it 10 feet over, and then you keep modeling and like you're aligning to your site plan, but at some point you realize that you've moved and your building doesn't align anymore. So then you can unlock. Let's see if I can find a blue that looks kind of like the original blue. That's close enough. Guides, when you make, if you measure using the tape measure, or use the letter T, you can measure like this and see a distance. And if you click a second time, let's say I wanted to know what 80 feet is, so here's kind of like your construction lines that you can make, and those are called guides. And if you want to change their color, you can do that here, and then see now it's like a red line. So this is where you would change that. If you have a section, we don't have any active right now, but that's these guys. If you want to add a section, it asks you to name it, then you hit place, and wherever I move this, it's going to cut my model here, and it's going to look the direction that those little arrows are pointing. So if I click there, see it's made this section cut, and it's telling me it's section cut number 1. And then if you use the selection tool and you actually select this, see it lights up blue, whereas here it's orange. It's telling me it's I don't see the gray one because I only have one section. If I were to make a new section, one would be gray and only one can be orange. Once you pick it, it turns blue and you can move it. So notice how it's like cutting through my model. Then if you zoom in, notice how it's highlighting everything blue, but once you click out or you hit escape or there, it's filling everything with black. That's because here my section fill is set to black. If I wanted like red, I can do that here, making this all red. So see, now the inside of my section is red. So why would you want that? Maybe like in Photoshop, once you get it in there, you want to like change the color of what's within there, or you need to be able to select that so you could put like a material. Let's say you wanted to make it look like concrete in there. You could set this to be a really bright color that you know you're not using, so that once you're in Photoshop you can use that magic wand or the color range and you tell it pick everywhere there's bright red, and Photoshop will grab that whole selection in one click, and then you just put a concrete texture and you mask it off. So it can help you understanding these settings speed up how you work. All these are like if you want to actually see these things or not. If you uncheck them, you won't see them, and if you check them, you'll see them. Match photo, you can take a picture. Let's say like you go to your site, you take a picture of where your building's going to go. You can then bring it in to SketchUp, and then you can actually place it in there and tell SketchUp, okay, here's the perspective lines, and you can actually model so it looks like you're actually there. This is how you would control that, if you want to see it or not, and how much the opacity is. So that's kind of like these main commands. Scenes is the next kind of big one, and by default, say we don't have a scene. So there's a couple ways we can add one. So let me just delete our section because I don't want that anymore. You can just hit delete. Let's say I wanted to create this as a scene, right? Or for your assignment, we're doing just the main views of your model, but let's say this one. So the first scene that I would create, I can do it two ways. I can either open up my scene and hit this plus, or you can go view, animation, add scene. So either of these ways will do the same thing. So once you've created one, it's telling me that the style doesn't exist. You can do whatever, you can create new. And then it's made that scene. And notice up here, you get scene 1. From now on, I don't have to go all the way back here to view animation, add scene. I can just always right click on this scene and add a new one right there. So it's kind of a lot easier to make the second scene than the first one. Let's add this one over here. You just hit add. And so if you look at the scene and then here we tell it show details and I scroll down, it's remembering all these settings. So how my camera was located, what was hidden. So if you want to hide a geometry, you can right click and tell it hide. It'll hide that guy. If I were to update this, it would remember that that guy's hidden. So now if I go to scene 1, it brings me to there. That guy reappeared, and as soon as you hit scene 2, he disappears and brings me back. You can also tell it to remember which layers were active. So I'll show you layers in a second. Which section planes you have, style, your shadows, like what time of day it was, which direction the sun was going. It will remember that. So if I were to go now to my shadows and here pick something like way different, say something like that, I can say update here, and then now from here I have these shadows. Notice they're really short. Over here I can grab these. I have long shadows. So all these settings can be remembered by view, and so you would set those all to the scene. If you wanted to start organizing your model using the layers, let's say you wanted a layer for like your floor slab, a layer for your columns, a layer for like some sort of system, you can do that. Or let's say you have multiple options, so different design options. You could have like mostly the same building, but maybe one feature changes, like the entry or some iconic element. You can do that really easily with combining layers and then the scenes, because the scene will remember what layers were active. So you can have a layer for like option 1, layer for option 2, and then we can toggle through them so that you can see the same view with 2 different options. So let's do that, where we have, let's add, like let's say we're going to put this guy in here. Make that a group. And then let's divide that face like that. Push this in. If you're trying to make a hole all the way through, you just need to get into a space where you can see the other face, and you move it until it says that, on face. And then once SketchUp tells you that you're about to push something onto the face, you click and it will cut that right out. If you do it anytime before or anytime past that face, it's not going to actually crop it out. It'll either leave a little gap or it'll push it out past the other side of it.
Theoretically, you could have just made a solid cube and carved it.
Yep, if that's what you wanted to do. So let's say this will be one entry feature, and then the other one has like, I don't know, we could have it look like there's a closed piece here. Let me group and move that back in a little bit. So maybe there's 2 options like that. So this will be option 1, and then the other one is open. So to do this, I'm going to go to my layers, and so by default SketchUp creates layer 0. And this is important because you always want to model everything on layer 0, and then you can just create the group and then move the group over to another layer. That way it's always hosted on layer 0. SketchUp gets a little weird sometimes with objects created on other layers, and then it kind of doesn't know what to do with them, and then turn stuff on and off, and it can get lost. So to add a new layer, I'm gonna hit the plus, and we can call this whatever you want to call it. So a option 1. Oops. And then I'm just gonna copy that, make a new one, call this one option 2. And so now we have these 2 layers, right? So I'm gonna add this as a scene, add, and then select this object. Notice once you select something up here where you have the entity info, this shows you basically how SketchUp is viewing this thing. It's saying it's an object, it's a group, it's on layer 1. And notice it became a drop down. Now that I have multiple groups, I can click this and put that on option 1. I can grab this now. So my scene is remembering that option 1 was on. Let's now make a copy of that scene. So right click, I'm in the same view, so we'll make this scene again if I tell it add. But on this scene, let's turn off that and right click here and tell it update. So now here you go, scene 3, scene 4. So then you can come to your scenes, and then this one, if you scroll down, you can call this, watch up here, see it says scene 3? I'm going to rename this option 1. And see, it immediately named that option 1. You could also like say closed. Boom. And then so it's closed. And then here this could be option 1 opened. Boom. So you have option 1 closed and open. Now let's say I want to make a different one that comes this way. Maybe this one is like, I'm just grabbing random colors and painting stuff. So I've made that guy. I'm gonna make that a group and then come all the way up here to the entity info and drop this guy on option 2. So here what we can do is, we had option 1 closed, option 1 opened. This is popping up again. So we need to go here on option 1 to my layers and make sure this is off. Tell it update. So now you go here, there, and then we can add a new scene here and bring this guy back. Boom. So then this could either be option 2 closed or option 3. This could be option 1, 2, 3. You can name them however you want, but the fact is that update. So now we can go like that. So you can have it opened with the orange closed this way or that way, and then you can do that really easily. You can also do different times of day for each one. So now let's look at, I'm going to just go to my zoom extents so I can see everything I've got modeled. Let's say I wanted to take all of these and make, let's say this is my final building. So the very first thing I made today. Let's get rid of everybody else. So this guy. So now let's add a little bit more detail to him. I'm going to show you this tool, the offset tool, which is kind of neat. You can just come in off of the edge. Let's say 18. Push this in. Maybe I'll close this face here. Push that all the way through. So now I've made this guy. So we've got this kind of shape. Let's give him something on this side that's different. Here's a cool thing. If you want to make, let's say I want to make like a shape out here, if you move the mouse down and then over, SketchUp will kind of snap to it for you and then let you do that. So there's a bunch of ways you can kind of have, you can hint to what you're trying to do and see if SketchUp will recognize it. So now we have this guy, make that a group. So let's say this is my final model and I want to export all the different elevations of this. We have, we'll probably move that guy in the other one. Let's try that. So here's my design. You can also use this if you're not trying to be too precise. You can use the scale command, which is this guy, on the outside of the group, and it will move the whole thing. So we've got this kind of weird thing. Another neat trick, you can right click an object and tell it flip along, and then you can try and guess the right direction, but I guarantee you'll always get it wrong the first time like I just did. So that's what I was trying to do. Let's flip it this way. So now that we have this shape, whatever this is, let's try and make this something that we can export. So let's get rid of all these scenes now. I don't want any of them. I'm gonna make new ones. Yep. So if you look up here, if you don't have the little house, you can right click and it's called views. So see, if you don't have it, you just bring up your views. If you click these, the first one will kind of give you an isometric view, and it will always be based on whichever corner you're closest to when you hit that button. So right now I was closest to that corner, so it picked this side. If I orbit to here, it's gonna bump me up right here. So if I click there now, see, it does that. And these are still technically in perspective. See how like this is not exactly aligned? So if you're trying to do a true isometric view, you need to change your camera to be parallel projection. Once you do that, you can see that these actually do create that kind of effect. So see, any line that's in that direction is parallel to that one, is parallel to that one. So in the real world, you can never actually see anything like this because we see in perspective. But if you're trying to do diagramming and stuff like that, that's like a really diagrammatic way to show it. So if I wanted to add that as a scene, you can do that. You can rotate slightly like that. Click that again. We can say add. You can do this. Hit there. Add. And let's do the last one. Hit add. And the neat thing is, technically this is an animation. Remember I said animation? So you're like view, animation, add scene. So you can play the animation either by going here or by right clicking and saying play. And what this will do is it's going to take us time, and there's settings where you can put like how long it actually stops at each view and then how long it takes to get to the next scene. So it's not really like how smooth it'll be, it's basically how long until the next one. So if you put two scenes really close to each other, it will still take whatever that time is. Let's say you set it to, I'm just backing out of it now. Let me go to view animation settings. it's got 2 seconds to get to the next one, and it's going to delay for 1 second. If we make that 0, make this like 7 seconds, now watch how smooth that will play. It's going to be a lot slower and smoother, and it'll also just bypass the view each time. It's not going to do that little lag that it did last time. So that can help your view look like, if you're trying to show something like that, like in a presentation or something like that, you want like your space rotating around slowly, you could do that. You could also do it so that it's not parallel projection, it's actually perspective views, and you move through the spaces. So you can set a bunch of cameras as if you were walking through your space, and it's that easy. Then you just hit play. Now let's say I want to get a true elevation. You can do these and see how it's actually flat. That's how you know you're in parallel projection. If you're not, if you're in perspective, see how you can see that? That's technically not a true elevation. That's just like a side view of your building. A real elevation is going to be a parallel projection view. Boom. So that's actually totally flat. It's like a real architectural elevation drawing is done like this. So that's the setting you'll need to change in order for that part of your assignment. I can then add this one, and then I'm going to go to this side, add, go to that side, and you can then add. I think I skipped one, but it's fine. So which one did I skip? Oh, that's the other thing. Once you change the settings on the animation, it will do it as you're working. So see here, it's going to go nice and slow. So if you're working and trying to go fast, don't put like a super long delay, because even if you move the mouse, watch, it's going to jump. It's going to keep jumping back. It won't let you keep working quickly. So it looks like we got them all here. So to export these, let's go back to this one. On the flip side too, you could, if you're like a super speed person and looking for like maximum speed, you could put 0 delay, and then now it's like boom, like instant to the next view. And if you, I've never tried this, but what happens if you play this? It's just like out of control. So there's no delay there. Let's try this face. So if I want to export this, I can go to File, Export. Before I do this, let me save, since I've not saved this at all. So save as, let's just go, this is intro. So let's do, today's date is the 24th. And then I can do an export on this once my mouse comes back. Yep. 2D graphic. So once you do this, you have a bunch of settings that you can change. It's weird that that's not there. So you have different file types that you can export, and then there's also different ways you can control the quality. So for now I'm going to use a PNG. I'm going to keep it as that because that's nice quality, and then you can go to options, and then if you, by default it'll click this, use view size, and I'll show you how that looks, and then I'll show you what I recommend to fix that. Because SketchUp, remember when we were looking at the styles, it said 1 pixel was like the size of your profiles or whatever, your edges will always be 1. That 1 is 1 pixel, so if you have more pixels, that number 1 is going to be a smaller ratio to the total width of that image. So the more pixels you have, the sharper your lines get. If you only had like 50 pixels wide, then 1 pixel will be like a big fat line. Right now we have this, so let's try that and say okay. So let's save this as screen size, so view size, and hit export. Now let's do the same exact view, export 2D graphic, PNG, options. Now I always recommend doing 4000 width. it's gonna lock your proportions. So make sure before you export that you've maximized your view so that your window is full size. Notice how much space I have to the right and to the left of this model and above. If I minimize that, now look how tight it is. And just watch it as you move this. See how like the view completely changes? If you're trying to export a view and then export later like just the shadows or just the line work, or let's say like you have a colored version and then a black and white version and you want to put them in Photoshop to like kind of overlay on each other, if you move the view at all or you add more of these little bars up here at the top, you know how we could do this and dock this one below it, see how that changed our view also? You don't really want to do that once you've started exporting because it won't align. Also, like if you're working on one laptop and then you go to a different laptop, you export from the same model, they might be slightly different because of those settings. They might be a little bit different. So now I'm going to go to Photoshop and then watch. Let's see how these are different once we open them up, because it actually makes a pretty big difference just using your view size or going to like that 4,000 pixel wide. Any other questions so far?
I'm just trying to follow, so I'm catching up.
Cool. So I'm gonna go File, Open. Oh, finally it popped up. So I'm gonna open both of these so that we can see, so view size, and then that's the regular one. And you can already tell just by looking at it. So here's our view size. Notice how much thicker those lines are. And once you start to zoom in, see it's very thick and chunky. And it loses quality really fast. If you look at this one now, by contrast, your lines are a lot sharper. So you'll see really quickly someone that just started using SketchUp, because all their drawings look like this. And they're like, man, like you can always tell a SketchUp drawing because it has these really chunky lines. And we change the settings. Usually they don't, and they have like that floor, the ground, or whatever. So that's kind of the first thing to kind of pay attention to, is how big you export actually makes a big difference. Because look, this one is already lower quality and I'm zoomed out a lot farther. If you look at this one, I'm zoomed in super tight, but it's still sharper than the other one. And that's just down to the file size. So if I go to image size, it's 41 inches by 22. If I change this to pixels, you'll see it's the 4,000 that we did. So the resolution is much higher. Also, our file size will be bigger, but that's just because it's a raster image, and it's basically the more pixels you have, the bigger your image will be. This one is only going to be 4 megs, and it's only 16. So if you look at pixels, that's where your big difference is. It's like a normal 1080p TV and like a 4K TV. So the pixels are just smaller and there's more density there.
You want it deliberately, you want it grayscale?
It's up to you for now. We'll look at later like why it's important to do that for different types of drawings. For this one, it's kind of, I don't remember if I wrote something.
Is there something I can check to really just turn off all color?
Yes, there is. So that's the style. So let's say we go back to the styles. If you wanted to quickly change everything, you can go to either like hidden line. That will immediately get rid of everything. You can use one of these just shaded ones, or like it really depends which one you want. I wouldn't recommend really going to like a wireframe view, because sometimes that gets like, it's almost more confusing than anything. But the hidden line is very good, and it has kind of like very architectural kind of look to it. Any other questions? So that's pretty much a good recap for like getting into SketchUp and understanding how to model. It'll really be up to you to kind of find what tools you like using the best. I showed you the basic ones. One that I use all the time that I find really useful, if we go back to like a perspective view, is I really like the eyeball. So here, this guy, if you notice when you orbit your view, the camera is going to orbit and change direction. It's kind of like it looks at one point and moves around, which is good for like modeling on the outside. But if I wanted to get in there or in here and look that way, you can scroll in here, but once you start to orbit, see, stuff gets in the way and it's kind of hard. The eyeball, if you click this, it will keep you where you are and it just looks around. So it makes it a lot easier to kind of like, you can scroll into here and then look up that way. Look this way. And then on the camera, this is kind of like a little thing you can play with. There's this thing called field of view. I added this shortcut because I use this setting a lot. The default in SketchUp is 35 degrees. I find that it's more useful for me. Depending on what you're doing, you'll use different fields of view. But I like 55 degrees. I find that's pretty close to like what humans can see. And like notice how from 35 I could see that. See how like this is like really tight here and like I can't see around there. You go to 55. I'm just typing the number and it appears down here. So 55. There you go. There. It's like a wider. And you can keep getting wider. You can also, instead of typing, you can just click and drag. 120 is like the extreme, and like look at how weird this will get. It's kind of like you're in like a fun house, and you get really like a ton of distortion. So if you want your building to look like a Zaha Hadid building, you just play with this and then you get that. And then on the other extreme, if you come down and you keep going down all the way to 0, notice how that becomes basically a parallel projection. So that's kind of the main difference. Is parallel projection is almost like no field of view. It's like a super crazy zoom lens that totally flattens all sort of perspective, versus like the other extreme is like a fisheye, sort of really wide lens. So I think what this is showing, that number is like the degree of like your actual cone of vision. It's not like a camera lens where that's like the size of what lens you're using. So in a camera, 100mm would actually be like a long lens, not a wide lens, and the smaller numbers are actually wider. This is actually, think of like how wide that angle is. So really narrow would be really like pointy, and then really wide number is really wide. I wouldn't go try 55 if you find, especially when you're modeling in tight areas. If you need to go a little bit wider, you can. One thing to notice is if I'm trying to draw a line here, as I zoom in, depending how much stuff you have in the model and how wide your field of view is, eventually like it disappears like that, and you can't see what you're trying to model. Like your camera is like, you might not be able to see it, and then there it's like clipping it out. The more stuff you add to the model, the wider basically your extents get, the sooner this happens. To get around that, you can always quickly go to your like field of view and just press it and compress it more, and see it comes right back. So see, now I'm using like a narrower field of view, but it lets me see that little corner. I can get right on it and then draw a line on there if I needed to. That's one of my like little tricks I use all the time. I have the eyeball and the field of view set to shortcuts. So if you want to set your own, I really recommend that. So you can like kind of zoom in here. Oops, you can zoom there and look up model. If you need to change field of view, you can do that quickly. And I also have that hide rest of model set to a shortcut. So here I have two different, oops, I clicked the scene somehow. Oh, it won't let me go because I need to hit perspective. So here I have two different groups. If I double click this one, I can't see the top of that guy because their other one is touching it. So if you go view, component, edit, hide rest of model, I always have to pause because I don't remember where they are because I always use the shortcut. So I added this one, and then I can go here and then hit that shortcut again, and then I can see it. So to add your own shortcuts, I'll show you some really useful ones, and I'll show you how to add them. So obviously hide rest of model is one. Viewing your shadows, I set that to a shortcut, and then like edges, and then profiles and shadows. So like you can set all of those independently. The field of view is one I use a lot. So to set these, you go to Window and Preferences. And then once you get there, go down to Shortcuts. So the one I want to add first is that Hide Rest of Model. So you gotta like type in what you want, and then once you find the command, you hit here, and then you have to add it using the plus sign once you've typed what you want. I use Shift H. That's like, you guys can use whatever you want. It just needs to be something you'll remember and that is easy to hit. I tend to like to use the shortcuts on the left side of the keyboard because usually your right hand is on the mouse. So if you set a lot of shortcuts using the left side, or something you can reach pretty easily depending like how far your reach is with your left hand, that tends to be pretty useful. If there's already a command on that key, SketchUp will let you know. It's like, hey, something's already on there, do you want to override it? I typically won't override the standard ones. I'll just hold Shift and add. Like, so instead of being just like one key, like here H is the hand. So for the hide rest of model, I always think like I need to hide, so I remember H, but it was already hand, so I hit Shift H. The one I have for the field of view is W, because to me it's like I'm warping the view, and it's right there on the left side. So it depends what you want to do. And then for like edges, under like view edge style edges, I put Shift E because that's easy for me to remember. Shift E for edges. I have profile set to Shift P just because I remember that, even though it's all the way on the right. And then my shadows I set to Shift S. So it's just Shift and then E for edges, P for profiles, S for shadows. That's just how I have it set up to work. And then the eyeball, I don't know why it's called look around. I don't know why they don't have that to a shortcut, even though it's really useful. So L is already taken by the line tool, so I put Y because it's an eyeball. It's EYE is how you spell I, but that's just how I remembered it. But something that works for you guys that you'll remember, that's the most important thing to assign them, because that's the trick if you want to get really fast, is remembering all the shortcuts and knowing when to use group, when to use component, and that array thing. So like we could draw like an entire building in like a second, like, well, not 1 second, but let's say we got 24 inch by 24 inch column. I want to push that up 15 feet, make that a component, call that column 1, and then we want to array this. Oops. Let's say I'm going to space that 30 feet 5 times, and then you can grab all those. 32 feet 3 times. Grab all of these. We can group that. Let's make it a component so we get that. So let's call this floor 1. Let's go in there. And then now you can just go crazy with this thing 5 times. And if you want to add, let's say we need this to be like a corner that's open. Let's grab the top one. Oh, I could do an angle if you grab the corner. Oh, I got something weird going on. I need to draw a line here. SketchUp can only do like straight objects. It won't do like a weird curved face. It has to somehow make it into a straight line. So that's why it was giving me that weird situation there. And there, you can back out, get rid of that. And so whenever you have something that's repetitive, you can always do it that way, where you're just adding. Here's a cool trick. You can, if you can get in the habit of modeling things in a way that lets you do things modularly. So here I can go from center of column to center of column, make that a group, and then here I'm going to divide that by 5. That's not too bad, maybe 6. So I need 1, let's do 3 times. So is that the right direction? Yep. You can put it here, and this I always get wrong. I think it's red this time. Okay, got it. So then this you could apply, let's actually go to a material. Where? Oh, glass. So I'm just quickly modeling this stuff so you could see. But now, since this is a component, notice how I didn't put it in the component. What I can do is this, select that and hit edit. You can copy or you can cut it. And notice here you have paste in place. Oh, I don't have that set to a shortcut, so I can show you that one. So that's one I always use at my office. I have that set to. So preferences, paste in place. I have that set to Control Shift B and add. So now I can do a Control X to cut it. So if something was not in a part of a group or a component but you wanted it to be, you just, as long as it's in the exact same spot, you can cut it out and paste it in place, and see now it's part of like the whole thing. So since that's a component, all these are kind of like related to each other. And then, so that was just like a quick thing where all those are the same, but if let's say I wanted to have like a feature or something that was different on each floor or something like that, then I wouldn't put it in that set. It doesn't mean you can't use components and combine them with groups. Like you might have a notch in it so that you could allow it for something else. Let's say like you needed to have like a hole in your building. Here, just need to make sure you get on face. Oops, I must have clicked. And now if you look down there, you'll see all the way through. So if you don't need that column, you just get rid of them. So stuff like that you can then start to like play around with and then do different things with it. And if that needed to be a stair tower, you could draw a stair in there or whatever you need to do. So since you guys are still kind of doing these kind of like conceptual models, a lot of that really repetitive stuff doesn't come in yet because you don't have like the same system like repeating across the whole thing. But try and think about what can you do that's kind of unique. So if you don't have the same object, then you have different sort of groups that you can work with. But always group the individual things together so that you can start playing around with that and not get them all stuck together. Any questions? Does this make sense? The scene will also remember, if we distort the view, it will remember that as long as you tell it update, stuff like that. So you can always change the settings on a view, and be careful not to just right click the wrong view, because whichever one you click on, it will update that one. So it happens to me all the time. I accidentally update the wrong one, and then you lose the old view, and you have two of the same view. Alright, so if we were going out of this, let's say we wanted to look at this, I'll do like a quick cover on the layout. So layout is kind of cool because it's its own thing. Oh, I have the wrong one. Probably have like 3 versions on here. Let's see if it'll launch. Alright, so what you need to do in order to use layout is first save the SketchUp model. And this is going to link just like what we were doing with InDesign, where you're linking in other files and you can see them and edit them. I don't need to see these close. I'm going to just open like a blank. You can do whatever size you want. This is a great way to get your drawing out of SketchUp where it's 3D and make it 2 dimensions and to scale. So I only really use this if I need to get a drawing perfectly scaled to print it out. So if I know I need to print at like 1/16 inch, something like that, then I'll do this. If it's just like a rendering or like a perspective view where there is no scale, I'll just do the 2D graphic that we did earlier, and I'll just export that because the scale doesn't matter, it doesn't have a scale. But if you do need a perfect scale, this is a super easy way to do it. So once you've opened a blank document, you say File, Insert, and then you just find where you save that file, and then it will just drop it in, right? So that's my actual SketchUp file. If I wanted to, you can double click and you can orbit it, see? And this is on like an 11 by 17, that's the size of this page, so I could do that. But what's more useful is you can select it and right click and say, let me do it up here so it doesn't go off my screen, Scenes. Right now it's in scene 2, but I could go to, let's say, one of these, which were our elevations. So see there, it's got that. And where it gets really cool is I can go now to scale and see current scale is around here. If I want 1/16 inch, I click that and see it scales the drawing for you. So this is the 11 by 17. At 1/16, that's how big it needs to be. So if I need a bigger scale now, you can click, you go back to scale, and let's say quarter. So maybe quarter should fit. So there's my drawing. It's fitting on 11 by 17. If you look over here, I have like another tray, the default tray. This one is the one you want to look at, the pages. If I duplicate this view, just right click on it and say duplicate, I can pick this exact piece. So now I have page 1, page 2. I can now change the scene to this one. Boom. If you want, you can do 1 scene per sheet. You can also do this where we move this over. And then this is really tricky. You need to be very careful with what I'm going to show you. You can double click to activate the view, but if you orbit or if you zoom in and out, you're changing the scale. Does that make sense? Because you're basically scaling the drawing up or down. So anytime you do those kind of commands to move the window, you can right click and say camera tools and then make sure you use pan and not any of these if you're already to scale. Just to double check always, what I always do is I'll back out and then always check the scale. If it's highlighted like that with a check, that means it didn't change. If you accidentally do this and scale it a little bit and you didn't catch it, when you go to look at the scale, it will tell you current scale is somewhere weird in between here, 143.2. So we want to use quarter inch. Just like in SketchUp, you can move an object, and if you hit Control, you have to hold it down. It will make a copy. And then we can make this one scene 8. So there's the other end of my building. And then I can take this one now, duplicate it, move it down. So I have page 1, page 2, Page 3 looks just like page 1, so let's change this to be scene 7. And now we have page 1, page 2, page 3. So what does that let you do? You can go File, Export, you can do a PDF, and this is going to keep this as a vector file. SketchUp it's a 3D model, right? So it's still live. If you do an export a 2D graphic, unless you do PDF, you're going to rasterize the image, you'll lose quality, and the file will go really big. Here, I can go this way, and now I can just call this one elevations 01, save. And here's important. This changes how good your stuff will look. You can do all pages, output resolution, I'm going to put high. For these, I'm going to do maximum. And then layers, whatever, it's great. Let's export. So it's thinking, page 2, page 3. Okay. So it's created these. And then now if I zoom in really nice, let's see how good these are. So see how sharp these are compared to what we got by exporting these. So here's our view size one. So let's compare that with this one. Ah, what is this? Go away. Okay, how do I close that? There. So you can see this one's way sharper and it's closer in than this one, which is a little bit farther out. It's already pixelated. This one's better. This one's really sharp because of PDF. And then the next page here is that, and the third page is that. So none of these are like the most beautiful drawings, but we have this now. And then what we can do with this is we can go to our InDesign. I don't have it there. And then we can drop this right into our portfolio or your layout or whatever it is you're working on. And even though it's multiple pages, we can still do it. And I'm going to show you something that's super cool about it if you use this workflow. We can lay this all out on our page. So here's Intro to Digital. Man, dude, it keeps giving me all these like helpful tips. Let's say here's project 2. So I'm going to go in here, File, Place, Intro, Elevations. Notice there's it's 3 pages, but I'm going to hit open. If I was trying to print this to scale in my portfolio, wherever it is here, it's really important that you don't click and drag, because once you do that, you resize the image to be however big you drag. If you click one time, it's going to place it at 1-to-1 size. So that would be it at the actual size, which by some miracle like fits perfectly. If you click and drag, so let's say I don't do that, if I undo and do this, it's going to resize it to be whatever size you do it. So if you're actually trying to print to scale, I find this happens a lot when people are like, man, it doesn't work, like you showed us how to do it, but when I print it's like tiny. And that's where it gets messed up, is because you forget, you're like, oh yeah, I gotta place it, it should fit here, but you're actually telling InDesign to resize it. And you can tell if you look, when it's dragging it, I think it tells you up here. So if you look here, see it says 29%, that's how much percentage of the actual image you're putting. Whereas if you just click one time, it's 100% immediately. Now, let's say on the next page, I want to put the next page, page 2. Let me do, I'm just going to use a shortcut, Control D. If I just do this, click again, what do you think is going to happen? That same first page, right? So I don't want that to happen. Let's place and check this option. This is important when you have multi-page documents you're trying to bring in. You say show import options, and now it will let you choose which page it brings in. So I can tell it, give me page 2. You just click one time, and then I can go here, Control D, place that, make sure that's checked, and then you say page 3. You click one time. So now we have this, and where this gets super cool, remember we said if you make a change, the scene will remember it in SketchUp. And then what did we do with this file? We linked that SketchUp model into it, right? And then InDesign does what? It links files into it. So our workflow right now is totally linked. We can completely change anything in the SketchUp model as long as we save and update in layout. We can reprint that PDF, and InDesign is just going to see it exactly where it was. We don't have to repeat that last step that we just did. So let's try it. Let's paint these guys. What color should he be? Yellow? So let's grab colors. So it's like a weird green yellow, so let's grab like a nice warm yellow. So here, and then let's grab like this color for that guy. So now when we look at it, see it's colored, right? The only thing I'm going to do is hit File, Save. Now I'm going to go to Layout, and I'm going to tell it here it didn't change, right? So all you need to do is right click and say Update Model Reference. As long as you have actually saved, it will go through and update all of these. Now watch this. All that work that we did before, export PDF, I'm going to override this file because that's the one that I linked into my InDesign. I'm going to hit save, keep everything exactly the same. It's letting me know I'm overriding. I'm going to say yes. If you don't want to lose the old copy, the trick is to rename the old one so that you have a copy, but you keep the naming of this one the same, so you can make a copy of the other one. Oh, there was a problem because I still have it open. So let me close it. You can't rename, you can't override a file if it's open. PDF, that one, save. Yep. And while that's going, if we go to InDesign, you'll notice I'll get an error. All of a sudden now it says there's 3 errors. If I open this up, it'll say error, it's links, modified link, elevation 1, elevation 1, elevation 1. It's the same PDF, but it's on 3 different pages, see 11, 12, and 14. If you click that, it will warp you to it and select the object. It's telling you, hey look, it's this one, or hey look, it's that one. So to fix this, all you need to do is look at your links. So let me zoom out here so we can watch this happen across all of them. You can double click here. See how this is like the parent one and it shows you all these are the same file. If I double click one of these, I have to go one by one. See, double click, it updated. If I double click the main one, it's gonna update all of them. But see, I didn't have to replace it or anything. It just went through and just updated all of them. So that's super helpful, especially once you start getting into like where you're laying out a board like that, where you have like 50 drawings on it, or you have a lot of work that needs to change, or let's say you show something to someone you work with, or a coworker, or one of your classmates comes and goes, oh man, that's really cool, but it would be cooler if inside this you had a blue square. Then you could be like, oh man, he's right, like I should have had a blue square. You would have to redo all that work if you didn't link everything in. Whereas now we can just come in here, tell it, yeah, look, he said there was a blue square in here, it'd be really cool. You can just add that guy in, hit Control Save, and close the PDF, go to Layout, right click, Update Model Reference, I think it's this page with the blue square, override the PDF, save, and then in InDesign just double click here. So it took that long to just do that because it ran through our whole workflow. Whereas if you hadn't done that, you would be replacing all those things. You would be re-exporting. The slowest way to do anything is to create kind of like bottlenecks along your workflow. Let's say right now I just was able to update 4 views just like that, like just one click. It redid them. Let's say you had these same 4 views, but now each one had 3 options. So now all of a sudden you have like 12 different views you need to do that. If you were manually exporting each one of those and then manually placing each one of those for a tiny little change, it would kill like the amount of time you have to actually do something. So then what that ends up doing is it kind of puts handcuffs on you because you're like worried about how much time it's going to take you to make a change. You're kind of hesitant to want to make a change. Whereas if you can speed up your workflow so that making a change is really easy and fast and dynamic, then you have flexibility to kind of work and create exactly what you want and not be afraid to kind of like a snowball effect of all these changes you'll have to make. Because I guarantee you, especially once you're in an office working or in studio, like when you show it to a professor or someone else, they'll come up with like tiny comments, and the actual change is like 5% of the amount of time it will take you to actually do the work, and then the rest of it will be updating all the drawings and reprinting and redoing all that stuff. So the more you can compress all that work, like I just showed you by linking stuff, the easier it will be for you. But that's just my opinion. I mean, you guys might find something that's even faster than that. So that's what I always recommend, is learn a way of doing something and then don't be afraid to test like variations on it. Any questions on that? Does it make sense? Yep. And in InDesign you would add labels and whatever. You can add arrows, label it, call this elevation 1, elevation 2, and then that doesn't need to always change. So
Is the same assignment due Monday, or is
Yep.
it gonna be
Mhm.
the same one?
Yep. I just gave you an extra week.
So I think
Thank
in
you.
there it says something about in the PNG saving as that. So you want us to do this?
You could do it
the
either way.
layout?
So here I was showing you like the easy way to do it if you want to export using the 2D graphic. I'm telling you at least 4,000 pixels wide. That's kind of like what we talked about. If you want to, you can do it using this way. You can also do it the other way out of SketchUp. You can do a file. So see how I have my scene set up, 5, 6, 7, and 8. I can do file, export. I think you can actually do it through printing also. If you go print, you can tell it scenes, so 5, 6, 7, 8, so 5 to 8, and then make this print to PDF, and then you can hit quality, use like the best one always, like either large format or ultra high, and then you could call this, let's call this elevations 2. But here what you give up is the ability to scale it to a size that you want. Well, you'll see what you get. You'll get it, I don't think it automatically opens. So elevations 2. See, it made like this huge page with this tiny little guy on there. It's literally just going to export that exactly as it was. So see, it's made some weird thing, made them vertical. So then you have to go back and tell it, do it the other way. And as long as you get it to set it up to start printing correctly, then it's fine. This way you have a little bit more control. It's a little bit extra step, but it's up to you. If you're doing perspective and stuff like that, then, I mean, you can do it all the way with either of the workflows. I'm just showing you 2 different ways to do it. Yeah, so that's all I got for today. So unless you got anything else you want to ask me about.
Just one thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was doing some other command when you pull it into InDesign.
Okay.
And you specified which pages. That's it. That was the only thing I missed.
So when you bring in a multi-page PDF, it's going to default to placing it on the first page.
Right.
So you need to make sure you check this option before you hit OK. you check show import options, and then once you've placed it, it'll ask what page. And also a bunch of other stuff. You can also try and do multi-pages at once. Like we could try doing this and saying like there, there, and then like there. But sometimes like it's not set up already, and then you can do one at a time. I just try and show you that you can bring in just one. Alright, that's what I got for today, so you guys are free to go. Yep.